Final report of the Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities, United States Senate, April 26th, 1976. Book 1, Foreign and Military Intelligence. Chapter 3, The Constitutional Framework for Intelligence Activities. A. The joint responsibilities of the legislative and executive branches, separation of powers, and checks and balances. While the Constitution contains no provisions expressly allocating authority for intelligence activity, the Constitution's provisions regarding foreign affairs and national defense are directly relevant. From the beginning, U.S. foreign intelligence activity has been conducted in connection with our foreign relations and national defense. In these areas, as in all aspects of our government, the Constitution provides for a system of checks and balances under the separation of powers doctrine. In foreign affairs and national defense, Congress and the President were both given important powers. The Constitution, as Madison explained in The Federalist, established a partial mixture of powers. Unless the branches of government, Madison said, be so far connected and blended as to give each a constitutional control over the others, the degree of separation which the maxim requires as essential to a free government can never in practice be maintained. The framers' underlying purpose, as Justice Brandeis pointed out, was to preclude the exercise of arbitrary power. This pattern of checks and balances is reflected in the constitutional provisions with respect to foreign affairs and national defense. In foreign affairs, the President has the power to make treaties and to appoint ambassadors and envoys, but this power is subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. While the President has the exclusive power to receive ambassadors from foreign states, the Congress has important powers of its own in foreign affairs, most notably the power to regulate foreign commerce and to lay duties. In national defense, the President is made Commander-in-Chief, thereby having the power to command the armed forces, to direct military operations once Congress has declared war, and to repel sudden attacks. Congress, however, has the exclusive power to declare war, to raise and support the armed forces, to make rules for their government and regulation, to call forth the militia, to provide for the common defense, and to make appropriations for all national defense activities. Moreover, under the necessary and proper clause, the Constitution specifies that Congress shall have the power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution not only its own powers, but also all other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. This constitutional framework, animated by the checks and balances concept, makes clear that the Constitution contemplates that the judgment of both the Congress and the President will be applied to major decisions in foreign affairs and national defense. The President, the holder of the executive power, conducts daily relations with other nations through the State Department and other agencies. The Senate, through its advice and consent power and through the work of its appropriate committees, participates in foreign affairs. As Hamilton observed in The Federalist, foreign affairs should not be left to the sole disposal of the President. The history of human conduct does not warrant that exalted opinion of human virtue which would make it wise to commit interests of so delicate and momentous a kind as those which concern its intercourse with the rest of the world to the sole disposal of a magistrate created and circumstanced as would be a President of the United States. Similarly, in national defense, the constitutional framework is a partial mixture of powers, calling for collaboration between the executive and the legislative branches. The Congress, through its exclusive power to declare war, alone decides whether the nation shall move from a state of peace to a state of war. While, as Commander-in-Chief, the President commands the armed forces, Congress is empowered to make rules for their government and regulation. Moreover, in both the foreign affairs and defense fields, while the President makes executive decisions, the Congress, with its exclusive power over the purse, is charged with authority to determine whether or to what extent government activities in these areas shall be funded. The Constitution, while containing no express authority for the conduct of foreign intelligence activity, clearly endowed the federal government, that is, Congress and the President jointly, with all the power necessary to conduct the nation's foreign affairs and national defense and to stand on an equal basis with other sovereign states. Inasmuch as foreign intelligence activity is a part of the conduct of the United States foreign affairs and national defense, as well as part of the practice of sovereign states, the federal government has the constitutional authority to undertake such activity in accordance with applicable norms of international law. We discuss below the manner in which Congress and the executive branch have undertaken to exercise this federal power, and the consistency of their action with the Constitution's framework and system of checks and balances. B. The historical practice. The National Security Act of 1947 was a landmark in the evolution of United States foreign intelligence. In the 1947 Act, Congress created the National Security Council and the CIA, giving both of these entities a statutory charter. Prior to 1947, Congress, despite its substantial authority in foreign affairs and national defense, did not legislate directly with respect to foreign intelligence activity. Under the Necessary and Proper Clause and its power to make rules and regulations for the armed forces, Congress might have elaborated specific statutes authorizing and regulating the conduct of foreign intelligence. In the absence of such statutes, presidents conducted foreign intelligence activity prior to the 1947 National Security Act on their own authority. In wartime, the president's power as commander-in-chief provided ample authority for both the secret gathering of information and covert action. The authority to collect foreign intelligence information before 1947 in peacetime can be viewed as implied from the president's power to conduct foreign affairs. In addition to the more or less discreet gathering of information by the regular diplomatic service, the president sometimes used specially appointed executive agents to secretly gather information abroad. In addition, executive agents were on occasion given secret political missions that were similar to modern-day political covert action. These, however, tended to be in the form of relatively small-scale responses to particular concerns, rather than the continuous, institutionalized activity that marked the character of covert action in the period after the passage of the 1947 National Security Act. There were no precedents for the peacetime use of covert action involving the use of armed force of the type conducted after 1947. 1. Foreign intelligence and the President's foreign affairs power. Although the Constitution provides that the President shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls only by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, beginning with Washington, presidents have appointed special envoys to carry out both overt diplomatic functions and foreign intelligence missions. The great majority of these envoys were sent on overt missions, such as to negotiate treaties or to represent the United States at international conferences. Some, however, were sent in secrecy to carry out the near equivalent of modern-day intelligence collection and covert political action. For example, in connection with U.S. territorial designs on central and western Canada in 1869, President Grant's Secretary of State sent a private citizen to that area to investigate and promote the possibility of annexation to the United States. Presidential discretion as to the appointment of such executive agents derived from the President's assumption of the conduct of foreign relations. From the beginning, the President represented the United States to the world and had exclusive charge of the channels and processes of communication. The President's role as sole organ of the nation in dealing with foreign states was recognized by John Marshall in 1816 and reflected the views expressed in the Federalist that the characteristics of the presidency, unity, secrecy, decision, dispatch, were especially suited to the conduct of diplomacy. As a consequence, historical development saw the President take charge of the daily conduct of foreign affairs, including the formulation of much of the nation's foreign policy. But Sole organ as to communications with foreign governments and historical practice did not amount to sole disposal in a constitutional sense over foreign affairs. As Hamilton declared, the Constitution did not grant that degree of power to the President in foreign affairs. Moreover, Marshall's reference to the President as sole organ did not purport to mean that the President was not subject to congressional regulation should Congress wish to act. For Marshall, in addition to speaking of the President as sole organ, went on to point out that Congress unquestionably may prescribe the mode by which such power to act was to be exercised. Congress, with its own constitutional powers in foreign affairs, its power over the purse, and under the authority contained in the necessary and proper clause, had the option of regulating the practice of using executive agents on foreign intelligence missions, as well as the conduct of foreign intelligence activity by other means. 2. The use of force in covert action. Covert action may include the use of armed force. In modern times, the President's authorization of the CIA-financed and directed invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs and paramilitary operations in Laos are examples of this type of covert action. The executive branch relies in large part on the President's own constitutional powers for authority to conduct such covert action. After the failure of the Bay of Pigs operation in 1961, the CIA asked the Justice Department for an analysis of the legal authority for covert actions. In its response, the Justice Department's Office of Legislative Counsel stated, "It would appear that the executive branch, under the direction of the President, has been exercising without express statutory authorization a function which is within the constitutional powers of the President, and that the CIA was the agent selected by the President to carry out these functions." The Justice Department memorandum pointed to the President's foreign relations power and his responsibility for national security. Arguing by analogy from the President's power as Commander-in-Chief to conduct a declared war, the memorandum contended that the President could conduct peacetime covert actions involving armed force without authority from Congress. The memorandum argued that there was no limit to the means the President might employ in exercising his foreign affairs power. Just as the power to wage war is the power to wage war successfully, so the power of the President to conduct foreign relations should be deemed to be the power to conduct foreign relations successfully, by any means necessary to combat the measures taken by the Communist bloc, including both open and covert measures. In view of the Constitution's grant of concurrent jurisdiction to the Congress in foreign affairs and Congress's exclusive constitutional authority to declare war, there is little to support such an extravagant claim of presidential power in peacetime. The case which prompted the Justice Department's argument, the invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, illustrates the serious constitutional questions which arise. In that operation, the President, in effect, authorized the CIA to secretly direct and finance the military invasion of a foreign country. This action approached and may have constituted an act of war. At the least, it seriously risked placing the United States in a state of war vis-à-vis Cuba on the sole authority of the President. Absent the threat of sudden attack or a grave and immediate threat to the security of the country, only Congress, under the Constitution, has such authority. As James Madison declared, Congress' power to declare war includes the power of judging the causes of war. Madison wrote, "Every just view that can be taken of the subject admonishes the public of the necessity of a rigid adherence to the simple, the received, and the fundamental doctrine of the Constitution, that the power to declare war, including the power of judging the causes of war, is fully and exclusively vested in the legislature." This view was also affirmed by Hamilton, who, although a principal exponent of expansive presidential power, wrote that it is the exclusive province of Congress, when the nation is at peace, to change that state into a state of war. It belongs to Congress only to go to war. Nor is there much support in historical practice prior to 1950 for the use of armed force to achieve foreign policy objectives on the sole authority of the President. The 1962 Justice Department memorandum argued that the practice of presidents in using force to protect American citizens and property abroad was authority for covert action involving armed force. Before the post-World War II era, presidents on occasion asserted their own authority to use armed force short of war, but as the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations noted in 1973, these operations were for limited, minor, or essentially non-political purposes. As the Foreign Relations Committee stated, during the course of the 19th century, it became accepted practice, if not strict constitutional doctrine, for presidents acting on their own authority to use the armed forces for such limited purposes as the suppression of piracy and the slave trade, for hot pursuit of criminals across borders, and for the protection of American lives and property in places abroad where local government was not functioning effectively. An informal operative distinction came to be accepted between the use of the armed forces for limited, minor, or essentially non-political purposes, and the use of the armed forces for acts of war in the sense of large-scale military operations against sovereign states. That these operations were, as the Committee on Foreign Relations noted, for limited, minor, or essentially non-political purposes is also affirmed by the eminent authority on constitutional law, Edward Corwin. Prior to the Korean War, the vast majority of such cases, Corwin wrote, involved fights with pirates, landings of small naval contingents on barbarous coasts to protect American citizens, the dispatch of small bodies of troops to chase bandits or cattle rustlers across the Mexican border. To stretch the president's foreign relations power so far as to authorize the secret use of armed force against foreign states without congressional authorization, or at least advice and consent, appears to go well beyond the proper scope of the executive's power in foreign affairs under the Constitution. Moreover, where Congress is not informed prior to the initiation of such armed covert action, as it was not, for example, in the Bay of Pigs operation, the constitutional system of checks and balances can be frustrated. Without prior notice, there can be no effective check on the action of the executive branch. Once covert actions involving armed force, such as the invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs or paramilitary operations, are begun, it may be difficult, if not impossible, for practical reasons to stop them. In such circumstances, covert action involving armed intervention in the affairs of foreign states may be inconsistent with our constitutional system and its principle of checks and balances. C. The constitutional power of Congress to regulate the conduct of foreign intelligence activity. Prior to the 1947 National Security Act, Congress did not seek to expressly authorize or regulate foreign intelligence activity by statute. Congress's decision not to act, however, did not reduce or eliminate its constitutional power to do so in the future. The necessary and proper clause and its power to make rules for the government and regulation of the armed forces, along with Congress's general powers in the fields of foreign affairs and national defense, were always available. In this light, the question of the legal authority for the conduct of foreign intelligence activity in the absence of express statutory authorization can be viewed in the manner set forth by Justice Jackson in the Steele seizure case. He wrote, "When the President acts in absence of either a congressional grant or denial of authority, he can only rely upon his own independent powers, but there is a zone of twilight in which he and Congress may have concurrent authority, or in which its distribution is uncertain. Therefore, congressional inertia, indifference, or quiescence may sometimes, at least as a practical matter, enable if not invite measures on independent presidential responsibility. Foreign intelligence activity, particularly political covert action not involving the use of force, can be seen as lying in such a zone of twilight in which both the President and the Congress have concurrent authority and responsibilities. As discussed above, the use of covert action involving armed force raises serious constitutional problems where it is not authorized by statute, particularly if Congress is not informed. When Congress does not act, the President may, in certain circumstances, exercise authority on the basis of his own constitutional powers. Congress can, however, choose to exercise its legislative authority to regulate the exercise of that authority. In view of the President's own constitutional powers, Congress may not deprive the President of the function of foreign intelligence. But, as Chief Justice Marshall stated, Congress can prescribe the mode by which the President carries out that function, and the Congress may apply certain limits or controls upon the President's discretion. The Supreme Court has affirmed this constitutional power of Congress. In Little v. Barrem, Chief Justice Marshall, speaking for the court, found the seizure by the U.S. Navy of a ship departing a French port to be unlawful, even though the Navy acted pursuant to presidential order. By prior statute, Congress had authorized the seizure of ships by the Navy, but limited the types of seizures that could be made. The President's orders to the Navy disregarded the limits set out in the law. If Congress had been silent, Chief Justice Marshall stated, the President's authority as Commander-in-Chief might have been sufficient to permit the seizure. But, Marshall declared, once Congress had prescribed the manner in which this law shall be carried into execution, the President was bound to respect the limitations imposed by Congress. There have been at least as many conceptions of the range of the President's own power as there have been holders of the office of the President. In the case of foreign intelligence activity, Justice Jackson's statement that comprehensive and undefined presidential powers hold both practical advantages and grave dangers for the country is particularly relevant, especially in view of the tension between the need for secrecy and the constitutional principle of checks and balances. Yet, as Justice Brandeis declared, checks and balances were established in order that this should be a government of laws and not of men. The 1947 National Security Act represented the exercise of Congress' constitutional power to order the conduct of foreign intelligence activity under law. By placing the authority for foreign intelligence activity on a statutory base, Congress sought to reduce the reliance on comprehensive and undefined presidential power that had previously been the principal source of authority. However, the language of the 1947 Act did not expressly authorize the conduct of covert action, and, as discussed earlier, Congress apparently did not intend to grant such authority. As a result, inherent presidential power has continued to serve as the principal source of authority for covert action. Congress continued to exercise this constitutional power in subsequent legislation. In the Central Intelligence Act of 1949, Congress set out the administrative procedures governing CIA activities. The 1949 Act regulated the CIA's acquisition of material, the hiring of personnel, and its accounting for funds expended. In 1974, Congress imposed a reporting requirement for the conduct of certain foreign intelligence activities. In an amendment to the Foreign Assistance Act, Congress provided that no funds may be expended by or on behalf of the CIA for operations abroad other than activities intended solely for obtaining necessary intelligence, unless two conditions were met. A. The President must make a finding that each such operation is important to the national security of the United States. And B, the President must report in a timely fashion a description of such operation and its scope to congressional committees. In short, the Constitution provides for a system of checks and balances and interdependent power as between the Congress and the executive branch with respect to foreign intelligence activity. Congress, with its responsibility for the purse, and as the holder of the legislative power, has the constitutional authority to regulate the conduct of foreign intelligence activity.